It was the spring of 1926 in a forgotten corner of Northmere County, where the fog settled low enough to hide the graves and the truth buried beneath them. The old county hall sat at the edge of a drained river, a building that smelled of mildew, lamp oil, and ink that had long since dried to dust. Inside, Arthur Lyle, a tired records clerk with tremor in his hands and coal ash in his lungs, was spending his final month before retirement cataloging what the living no longer cared to claim. Births without fathers, deaths without prayers. That morning, as the rain whispered against the cracked windows, Arthur opened a warped wooden drawer that hadn't been touched in decades. Behind a stack of weather-eaten parish forms, he found it. A folded sheet of parchment, its edges scorched black as if kissed by fire, and then left to smolder in silence. The ink had bled upward, forming the shape of veins across the page. It was a birth record, dated but unsigned. One mother's name, Eliza Holleran. No address, no age, no witnesses. But beneath her name, 5 separate men listed as the father, each with the same surname, Holleran. No one crossed out, no corrections, no logic to it at all. Just 5 men, and one mother who must have known them all. Arthur's pen stilled. He read the names again, his lips moving silently over each one. Then he noticed something that made his breath catch. The 5th name, faint, reversed, written backward across the parchment, as if it had been copied from a mirror. He lifted the document closer to the lantern light, and for just a second, the ink shimmered wet, though it should have been dry for decades. And there, across the margin, a faint imprint of handwriting began to appear. His own. By evening, Arthur locked the office, crossed the town square, and never spoke again. Within a week, the registrar's report listed him as institutionalized for auditory disturbances. The other clerk said he'd been found muttering inside the archive vault, tracing invisible words through the air, repeating the same phrase over and over. It's writing itself. And that ledger, the one that carried 5 fathers and no child's name, was sealed beneath a wooden floorboard where it still rests. Some say if you listen at night, you can still hear the scratching of a pen beneath the boards, as if the record is still being written. If this story found you tonight, tell me, where are you watching from? Is it already midnight where you are? Or just before dawn? You're watching Underbelly Bloodline, where the forgotten names of Appalachia still whisper through the walls. Don't forget to subscribe, because some histories don't fade. They write themselves back. They called it Grayvale Hollow, a sink of land so deep the sun barely touched it, where fog lingered even in summer and nothing grew straight. The house there wasn't much more than a leaning stone box, its windows nailed shut, its roof bowed like a tired spine. It belonged to a woman named Eliza Holleran, the same name inked into that scorched ledger from Northmere. On the morning of November 6, 1926, a local midwife named Martha Crenwell was summoned to the hollow. She was nearly 70, half blind, and known for keeping her mouth closed about the strange things born in these hills. She walked there alone, through sleet, through mud, with her bag swinging like a clock at her side. By the time she reached the house, the chimney was cold. No fire, no warmth, only the sound of something dripping from the ceiling into a tin basin. The mother lay still on the bed, her eyes fixed on the rafters. She didn't speak, didn't cry out, just stared, as if she'd already seen what was about to happen. The birth came quick, too quick. A single cry should have followed, but there was none. The baby slid into the world silent and colorless, her tiny chest still. Martha pressed 2 fingers to the child's neck, but there was nothing. She was ready to close the eyes and whisper a prayer, when the room changed. It wasn't the air that shifted. It was the sound, something low, like a whisper under the floorboards. Then the baby exhaled, but it wasn't a cry. It was a man's voice, raspy, deep, a single breath that formed words no one could place. Martha would later write that it wasn't English, nor any Welsh she'd ever known. The mother turned her face away and began to tremble. When Martha offered her the child, she refused to touch her, refused even to look. "That's shadow," she said. "That's not mine." The midwife wrapped the infant tight, laid her in an old cradle by the fire, and left before dark. She told no one what she'd heard, not the voice, not the word it spoke, not the silence that followed. But that night, she woke from a dream of standing in that same room, watching the cradle rock on its own, and just before she opened her eyes, she swore she heard it again, a breath that didn't belong to her. The records that survived from Grayvale Hollow were scattered like bone fragments, half-burned parish lists, torn census sheets, and a handful of payroll slips from an abandoned coal shaft called Hollerans Pit. Somewhere inside those fragments, 5 names kept reappearing, always the same surname, always written in different hands. They were the 5 Holleran men, miners, shepherds, and drifters who lived within 5 miles of one another along the ridge of Northmere Moor. None married, none had families, none appeared in the archives before the age of 20. It was as if they'd all arrived one day, fully grown, unaccounted for, but already bound by blood. Locals said the 5 men were brothers, though no one could prove it. They didn't live together, but they shared habits, working by night, walking the moor when the fog rolled thick, and humming the same low tune that sounded more like a chant than a song. Old-timers in the valley said if you heard it, you'd start humming too, without realizing. The oldest, John Holleran, was said to speak with a voice that wasn't quite his. It wavered between accents like he'd borrowed it from someone long dead. The youngest, a man barely 21, was described as aged before his time, with hands like a miner and eyes that didn't blink in sunlight. The village constable once tried to collect birth certificates from all 5, but none existed. Their ages changed from one record to the next, sometimes by decades. And when their blood was tested for a medical survey in 1927, the results were quietly sealed. Those samples sat untouched for nearly a century, until 2022, when a university project digitized the old archives. The findings made no sense. All 5 men, separated by time, by age, by paper, shared an identical Y chromosome loop, flawless and recursive, like a reflection folding in on itself. Not inherited, not passed down. Copied. One researcher wrote in his private notes, "The blood doesn't evolve. It remembers whatever tied those 5 men together wasn't lineage. It was echo, a pattern too deliberate to be human, too ancient to be accidental. And when the genetic software tried to map their ancestry, the program crashed, looping the same word on repeat, origin unknown." When the midwife Martha Crenwell died in the winter of 1926, her belongings were sealed in a cedar box and passed to the parish with a note that read simply, "Keep it shut." For nearly 70 years, it remained untouched in the archives of Northmere until a historian cracked it open during a flood restoration project. Inside were brittle letters, dried herbs, a silver thimble, and one small notebook, its pages warped by moisture and smudged with something darker than ink. The handwriting trembled across the paper, hurried and uneven, as if written by candlelight while someone or something watched. The entries began plainly: routine births, stillborn twins, the kind of sad statistics that marked her profession. But halfway through the book, the tone changed. She began writing about the child below the moor, about the cradle that rocked itself, about the whispers that came not from the walls, but from inside the wood grain. One passage described how she returned, months after the birth, to find the house locked from the outside. She didn't enter, but she listened through the boards. What she heard wasn't crying, it was reciting. A rhythm of numbers and pauses, repeated like a prayer. She wrote them down in the margins, afraid to forget. Later generations would recognize those same numbers as field transmission coordinates, the kind used in early military radio tests across the moors. Coordinates that pointed to a sealed mining shaft where 5 bodies had once been unearthed, each with the surname Holleran. At the back of her notebook, pressed flat between the final pages, was a thin braid of human hair, bound tightly with twine and tied in a knot known in old folklore as the bound tongue. A charm meant to silence whatever spoke through the mouths of the living. It had been placed beneath the child's cradle, she wrote, to keep her quiet, not from crying, but from calling something back. Her last note, scribbled at a tilt, was only 4 words: "The child listens backward." That same night, Martha's neighbors reported hearing her muttering in her sleep, strings of numbers in a flat, mechanical tone. She stopped breathing before dawn. When her house was searched, her window panes were lined with salt. Her pillow smelled of iron. By 1930, the child from Grayvale Hollow was 4 years old, small, pale, and rarely seen outdoors. They said she could sit for hours without blinking, her head tilted as if listening to something just beyond the walls. When her mother brought her into Brackenfield Infirmary, the girl's left arm hung limp, swollen at the wrist. The mother claimed she'd fallen, though her eyes never met the doctor's. The attending physician was Dr. Edwin Hale, a man known for his precision and quiet skepticism. He administered a mild sedative to reset the bone. Routine, uneventful. But what happened next would follow him until the day he died. Minutes after the child drifted into unconsciousness, her lips began to move. Not the slurred murmurs of sleep, but deliberate, timed speech. A man's voice filled the room. Deep, rhythmic, old. At first, Hale assumed a hallucination, exhaustion or imagination playing tricks in the low lamplight. But the nurse standing beside him froze. The child was speaking in coordinates, numbers, directions, elevation markers, recited with the cadence of a military radio transmission. Then the room changed. The air tightened. The glass instruments on the counter trembled. The temperature dropped 3 degrees in less than 2 minutes. The flame beneath the ether lamp dimmed without wind. And somewhere in the far corner, the static hum of the hospital's new telegraph unit began to click, perfectly in sync with the rhythm of her words. South, 31, west, 14. A pause. Then another phrase. Quieter this time. Not above. Below. The nurses later swore they heard their own names whispered seconds before they spoke. Not echoes, predictions. The voice in the girl's throat anticipated them, syllable by syllable. When Hale tried to end the sedation early, the heartbeat monitor failed. Not flat, but looped, repeating the same pulse over and over, like a record skipping on the same beat. The child awoke moments later, silent, calm. Her eyes opened, glassy and unafraid. She whispered to Hale, "You shouldn't have listened." That night, the doctor locked himself in his office, rewrote the incident as a respiratory episode, and requested immediate transfer. When his belongings were found years later, a single page from his notebook remained. Written across it in trembling ink were 5 words. She spoke from where we aren't. By the summer of 1952, the valley of Northmere had grown quiet. The old mines were flooded, the farms nearly gone, and the last traces of the Holleran family had faded into the soil. But one voice, the voice that began in a child's throat, had not. That year, the BBC sent a linguist named Thomas Ellery to the region. His task was simple: to collect dialect recordings for the British Voices Project, a government-funded archive meant to preserve dying accents before they disappeared forever. He carried a single-reel recorder, a notebook, and a sense of detached curiosity. Ellery had been warned by locals not to visit Grayvale Hollow. They said the air down there listens, that it repeats what you say hours later. But his curiosity won. He followed a dirt path down into the hollow and found her, a woman now in her late 20s, living alone in the ruins of the same house where she'd been born. Her name was not on any parish roll. Her door had no handle, only a latch tied with black ribbon. When Ellery knocked, the door opened before his hand touched it. She was standing there, pale, thin, her eyes fixed on him, with a look of recognition too exact to be chance. And when she spoke, the recorder clicked on by itself. "Tommy," she said, in a man's voice, a voice he knew. It was the voice of his older brother, who had died 9 years earlier during a London bombing raid. The same tone, the same rasp on the S's, and then, without pause, she said the phrase his brother had whispered to him once as children, long before the war. "It isn't broken, it just remembers." He hadn't told that story to anyone. It had never been written down. The recording lasted 19 minutes. During playback, the sound warped, low frequencies pulsing beneath her speech, as if another voice was speaking inside hers. The engineers who reviewed it later described phonic displacement, a phenomenon with no clear science behind it. The reel was sealed and labeled "Do Not Air." Ellery left the hollow and never recorded again. In his resignation letter, he included a single torn scrap from his field journal, a child's drawing of a bicycle wheel, each spoke numbered like hours on a clock. Around it, he'd written the words she said next, after the recorder stopped. "You'll hear it again when the circle closes." By 1960, Grayvale Hollow had nearly sunk back into the earth. The house where the Holleran woman lived, that crooked shell of stone and silence, was barely standing. Roof caved in, door swollen by years of rain. But still, smoke sometimes rose from its chimney at night, though no one saw her outside anymore. That winter, a parish minister requested a welfare visit after rumors spread that she'd stopped eating, stopped bathing, and had begun talking to her reflection as if it were alive. The one sent to check on her was Nurse Evelyn Marr, a psychiatric nurse from Brackenfield Asylum. Evelyn wasn't new to delusion. She'd seen grief twist people into ghosts of themselves. But what she found inside Grayvale Hollow was different. The air was heavy, not stale, but watchful. Every window was draped in black cloth, the corners pinned down with nails dark from rust. The mirrors were gone, even the smallest hand glass stripped from its frame. The kitchen held no silverware, no metal surfaces at all, as if she'd erased every chance of reflection. The woman sat in a chair by the cold hearth, her hair half gray now, her eyes open too wide. She spoke slowly, clearly, not mad, not lost, just tired. "He breathes when I don't," she said. When Evelyn asked who, the woman only smiled. "You'll see him if you stay too long." During her second visit, the nurse noticed something strange. When she spoke, she could hear her own breathing, echoed, half a beat behind, like someone mimicking her rhythm in another room. That night, she wrote in her report, "The silence here is not empty. It's waiting for sound." After the third visit, the woman was gone, vanished. But while stripping the bed for transport, Evelyn found something sewn into the mattress lining, a shard of mirror, small as a coin, wrapped in black thread. Its surface was darkened by time, yet one patch remained faintly reflective, just enough to catch the shape of a mouth. It wasn't Evelyn's. When she touched it, the temperature in the room dropped, her breath fogged, and somewhere near the covered window, a faint exhale answered her own. She resigned a week later, claiming auditory hallucinations. Her final note before she left Brackenfield read only, "The reflection learned to wait." It was the spring of 1965 when the hillside beneath St. Catherick's Rise gave way. The old chapel that stood there, once a place of hymns and harvest weddings, had long since been left to the ivy and the wind. Its stone walls leaned inward like old bones, its bell tower silent for decades. But when heavy rains loosened the soil, the ground cracked open behind the altar and revealed something the parish was never meant to see. Down beneath the chapel floor, sealed by centuries of damp air, was a crypt, one no record ever mentioned. 5 stone vaults arranged not in rows, but in a perfect circle, their lids lined with lead. Each bore a single letter, H, no dates, no prayers, no names. Just that one mark, repeated 5 times like a signature left, by something that didn't need to explain itself. When engineers were called in to assess the collapse, they mapped the chamber for structural stability. But as they laid out the diagram, something uncanny emerged. The 5 vaults were aligned with mathematical precision, each one pointing to a lunar phase, waxing, full, waning, dark, new, as though the burials had been arranged to track the rhythm of the moon. The air in the crypt was dry, too dry for the depth. There were no insects, no rot, only the faint scent of iron and something colder. One of the men, a stonemason named Griffin, claimed he could hear pressure behind the walls, like lungs under rock. His partner laughed, until they both heard it. A long exhale, then 5 short breaths, rhythmic, in unison. The team resealed the vault that night, welding the doorplate closed, but one worker, a young engineer from Cardiff, refused to come back the next morning. He said he'd woken in the night to the sound of whispering in the pipes of his flat, voices counting, 5 at a time. The parish declared the crypt a stability hazard and buried it under new stone. But the weld marks along the chapel's foundation never cooled evenly. Decades later, when scanned for restoration, those same lines registered thermal fluctuations, as if heat was pulsing beneath them every 28 days. Some said it was groundwater. Others said it was the moon, dragging something alive through the veins of the hill. But one old archivist, before he died, wrote a single sentence in the chapel's logbook: "You can't bury what was never separate." By the early 2000s, the story of the Holleran bloodline had withered into folklore, a ghost story whispered at the edge of the moors. But in 2021, inside a quiet genetics lab at the University of Cardiff, the legend woke up again. A doctoral student named Dr. Isla Morvan was cataloging mislabeled biological samples from the National Archives' cold vault. Ancient blood vials sealed in glass and wrapped in parchment tags from the 1920s. The handwriting was faint, the ink faded, and every label smudged by time. But one batch stood out. 5 vials, all marked with the same year, 1927, each one labeled with a single letter, H. Isla logged them into the database, assuming they were part of a livestock genetics study. But when the samples were analyzed, the results broke every known biological law. The DNA wasn't just similar, it was identical, strand for strand, down to every marker, the same Y chromosome, the same cellular age, the same invisible flaw, a looped distortion in the genome's architecture, folding in on itself like a mirrored spiral. She reran the test 3 times. The pattern didn't change. The computer flagged it as recursion anomaly. A glitch, it said. But there was no glitch. The sequence didn't evolve like normal DNA. It reflected. When she magnified the region, she saw it. A section of code that seemed to read itself backward, duplicating the way a voice echoes across an empty room. It was a perfect loop, not inherited, but repeating. That night, Isla stayed late. The lab was silent except for the hum of the refrigeration units. She typed a note into her private log. They weren't born. They resumed. Minutes later, the system froze. Her monitor flickered and displayed a 6th sequence, one she hadn't uploaded. Its timestamp read 11:46 p.m. Her clock read 11:42. Somehow the system had predicted its own entry, as if the data already knew what she would find. The next morning, Isla was gone. Her lab coat remained on the chair. The report she'd printed was missing. Only her voice memo survived, recorded on her personal phone. You can still hear the hum of the freezer behind her, and her last whisper before the tape cuts out. The blood isn't alive, it's remembering. It began quietly, the way most hauntings do in the digital age. In 2025, a new entry appeared on an open-source ancestry database. No photo, no name, just a voice file, a brief greeting meant to confirm a DNA submission. At first, the system flagged it as corrupted. Overlapping frequencies, too many tonal layers for a human vocal range. When the technicians listened, they heard 2 voices, a woman's and a man's, speaking at the same moment from the same throat, perfectly synchronized. Hello, it's still me. The recording lasted 7 seconds. No background noise, no static, just the sound of someone speaking from 2 directions at once. Within an hour, the waveform was analyzed and cross-matched across the global archive. The result sent a ripple through the database, a 99, and 7% matched to the 1952 BBC tape, the one labeled "Do Not Air Phonic Displacement." 73 years apart, same breath, same tone, same impossible harmony. But this time, there was no reel-to-reel machine, no rural hollow, no ghostly parlor, only the cold hum of a cloud server buried under a mountain in Switzerland. The user's profile vanished the next morning, deleted, no trace of registration. Yet, every 42 hours, the file reopened itself, time-stamped anew, as if someone, or something, was logging back in. Each time the system played the recording again. Researchers tried to quarantine the anomaly. They encrypted the file, moved it to an isolated drive, even destroyed the physical backup. It didn't matter. The program restored itself, line by line, byte by byte, like a digital form of breathing. The last traceable metadata entry appeared on October 12th, 2025. It read, "I am the 5th returning." After that, the entire sequence folded into silence. But those who worked the night shift claimed that every 2 days, just after 3 a.m., the system lights flicker once, and for 7 seconds, the speakers hum with an untraceable sound, not voice, not static, something between both. And if you amplify that signal beneath the distortion, you can still make out the faintest words. It isn't broken, it just remembers. If this story reached you tonight, tell me, do you believe a voice can survive the body, or that memory can learn to speak? You're watching Underbelly Bloodline, where bloodlines don't end, they reconnect. Subscribe, because some stories don't stop when the mouth closes. They just wait for another voice to start breathing again.